So here we are, take two. Sorry about that. I was on the wrong page. My name is Stuart Stotts, and I am delighted to be here with you. I'm a musician and an educator, and I'm also an author. I've written 3 books for the Historical Society, and I'm going to talk with you today about one of them. It is the book called Father Groppi. Father Groppi. And it's a particularly timely book right now because of, if you read the news at all, you know that many people are protesting and talking about racial issues in our society, especially around black culture and black people. And that's very much what the story of Father Groppi is about. I will tell you a little bit about him. I'll read a couple pieces from the book, and then I will suggest a couple things you might do to kind of build on this. So we'll be together for maybe a little more than 10 minutes or so. So Father Groppi was born in Milwaukee in 1930. He was born to his parents were Italian immigrants, and they were kind of new to the country. And as a result, Father Groppi, because his neighborhood wasn't predominantly Italian, it was Irish, he experienced discrimination as a kid. Kids made fun of him for his family's accent, and he learned something about what it was like to be made fun of and discriminated and have prejudice against. So he grew. He's very good at sports, but as he grew, he decided he wanted to be, after a little while, a Catholic priest. So he went to seminary and was assigned to a church. This church, actually the second church he was assigned to, was in the heart of Milwaukee, in the very poor, almost all black area. And Father Groppi he didn't know that much about what life was like there. So he began to talk to his parishioners, the people in his church. And he discovered all the different ways that people were discriminated against, the way they were treated. For one thing, they all kind of had to live in one spot because no one would rent to them anywhere else. And they also, they went to schools that weren't very good. They were schools that were segregated, which meant, all the black people were in one school and white people were in another. And those schools tended to be in worse shape, ceilings falling down, old books, desks that were cracked, things like that. So it wasn't fair. And Father Groppi, as he learned about this, thought, well, that's not right. And it certainly didn't fit with what he believed, because he was a priest, and what people should do when they saw unfairness in the world. So he worked for a while. There was an effort in Milwaukee to desegregate the schools, to get them more mixed. And then he went to march down south with Dr. Martin Luther King. There's a set of very famous marches that took place in Selma, Alabama. And he went down there along with a lot of other kind of clergy or priests or preachers from the north who said, we want to stand with people who are marching for freedom and fairness, equality. So Father Groppi goes down. He's still a pretty young man. He goes down there, and I'm going to read you a little part about what it was like when he was there, because I think it tells you something about him. He said, although the group from Wisconsin had been told to stay together for their own safety, Father Groppi didn't listen. He kept wandering off on his own. One of the priests who traveled with him said, one minute he'd be there, the next minute he'd be gone, down a dusty side street, heedless of his own safety, to sit on a rickety porch or a dust of a grassless yard, to play with little kids. Few shied away from him. Father Groppi wanted to learn about the lives of black people in Selma. He was good at making connections, and he wasn't afraid. So he kind of jumped in. He wanted to learn, what's life like? And it says something about him that people just liked him. People felt comfortable. They trusted him. So he came back to Wisconsin after that, and he looked around and he thought, well, there's discrimination in the South, and you've probably heard about things like people not being able to use the same bathrooms or sit in the same part of the bus or drink from the same water coolers, all those kinds of discriminatory practices. He said, well, yeah, that's true in the South. Maybe we don't have those exact laws here in the North, but people are still being discriminated against right here. So he decided he was going to work for equality right here. Didn't have to go down south to do that. And he formed a group of people to work with him, and they decided that they were going to work on the fair housing. Because in Milwaukee at the time, and we're talking here the late 60s, mid to late 60s, you could just not rent to somebody because of the color of their skin or their ethnicity or their gender or whatever. You could just say, nope, sorry, not renting to you, right? And this was a problem. It meant that people could never get out of this central core of the city. So he began to work on it and work with people. And what's probably most memorable about Father Groppi is that he organized a series of marches. And again, on the news, you've probably seen people marching. So now we're talking 50 years ago or so, people marching for similar kinds of issues, but this was particularly for fair housing. And I'd like to read to you, it's a little bit longer section, about what it was like to do this march, because they marched across the viaduct from an area that was black into an area that was white to show that they wanted equality of housing. And so I'll read what this was like, and then we'll talk just a little bit about what you might do. So on August 28th, 1967, more than 100 marchers gathered at Freedom House, which was a place they had devoted to this cause. They marched through the streets and then south across the 16th Street Viaduct. On the north side of the viaduct, around 50 white people from the south side held signs that said, "We Southsiders welcome Negroes." The marchers crossed the long viaduct, and the viaduct is almost a mile long, looking down on railroad yards and factories, and they sang freedom songs. When they reached the south end of the viaduct, a very different greeting met them. Milwaukee police held back more than 3,000 angry white Southsiders who held signs and yelled at the marchers. The marchers were frightened, but they continued walking 3 miles to the park. They planned to have a picnic there, but they didn't have a permit. By the time they arrived, more than 5,000 white people opposed to the march gathered around the park, trying to disrupt the marchers. Father Groppi attempted to speak, but the police urged the marchers to return to the north side. The police didn't think they could hold back the angry crowd much longer. After about 15 minutes, Father Groppi led the marchers away, but he said, "We're coming back tomorrow night." They marched toward the viaduct. Hundreds of people followed them, shouting horrible things to them, and throwing bottles and bricks. The police protected the marchers as best they could, but in the end, the marchers were forced to run for their lives back across the viaduct. Well, they continued marching for 200 nights. Sometimes a lot of people, sometimes just a few, saying they would not give up. And when they eventually stopped, they still hadn't won fair housing in Milwaukee. But not too long after that, Martin Luther King was assassinated. And at that time, places all over the country, to try to quell unrest, voted for laws that they thought would make things more equal. So pretty quickly, Milwaukee had that Fair Housing Act that Father Groppi had been working for so long. Well, maybe you can see the parallels to today. Always the possibility of some violence and people who are very opposed to each other's views. So this is not new, what's happening now. It's different. And one of the things you might think about, if you want to read this book, and I will post, you can get a free e-copy of this, which I will post here when I'm done. And this free e-copy of the book you might like to read, and then you could think about, well, what's the same and what's different in terms of how people protested, what they were protesting about, what their tactics were. I think you'll find some things that are the same, some that are different. Another thing you might like to do would be to talk to your parents or maybe even your grandparents, people who are like my age and older, and see what they remember about the civil rights era. They might remember Father Groppi. He was pretty famous in that time as a leader. But or they might just remember in general the sort of the times, and see what they remember. Hear their stories. What was it like for them to live through that time, and how would they compare it to now? And last of all, another thing you might do would be to explore this idea of freedom songs. And these songs were very important for people as they protested. They drew some strength from singing together. And there are many, you can find lots of resources on the internet for freedom songs. And you will see that this was a way that people kept up their strength in very, very difficult times, which maybe we face right now as well. But last of all, we do see, even if Father Groppi wasn't successful himself and the people he worked with, in the end, things did change to get better. And people getting together to speak out for what they want, speak out for fairness, equality, justice, all those kinds of things that we're still talking about, it can make a difference. Even today, we see things making a difference. So thank you very much for being with me here today, hearing about Father Groppi. I'll just show you the book one more time. Looks like that right there. And I hope you will read it. Take advantage of who doesn't want a free book? And take advantage of that. Read it. Think about Father Groppi. And thank you for spending some time with me here today. My name's Stuart Stotts. And enjoy the rest of the summer, whatever that looks like for you. Thank you.